Mars. Proves to be a fascinating presentation. Jeff Matthews, Director of Venture Strategy and Research for the Space Frontier Foundation and the leader of their new Space Venture Labs. That's a virtual accelerator that seeks to empower innovation within the new space sector. Jeff recently served as the program manager for Towery Group's contract with NASA's Office of the Chief Financial Officer, Strategic Investments Division, where he provided subject matter expertise for enterprise application and business intelligence architecture development to support performance planning and analysis of the agency's strategic plan. In this session, Jeff will describe NASA's transformation towards a boundaryless information flow. I love to see that. Boundaryless information flow state within the context of the Mars program. So a warm, open group welcome, please, for Jeff.
Thank you, sir. All right, it's a pleasure to be up here today. Really looking forward to this. Let me clarify that these are my positions and not the agency's, although I will give you the official agency view on the mission, but they made me be very clear that I said that. So, and there's a few NASA folks in the audience that I'm sure appreciated that this works. Is this thing on? Gotcha. Is that working now? Or I can take that. That works too. A for effort, right? Okay, that's... Does this much better? Okay. Not the agency's official view. So, as the warm welcome introduced me, I am the Director of Venture and Strategy Director of Venture Strategy and Research for the Space Frontier Foundation, and I'm trying to get more people into space. I will talk a little more about that at the very end because all of you could potentially benefit from that. So today we're going to talk about NASA's journey to Mars, and we're going to talk about why success in this impacts each and every one of you. The short version of this is you are all our customers. NASA as a public agency is a domestic agency with a global footprint, and its daily operations impact you as individuals and your bottom line for your companies and your lines of businesses. So in order for us to be able to correctly execute our mission, we need to have a foundation for execution that's built on robust enterprise architecture that also allows us to meet our mission-critical research and exploration goals. So the journey to Mars itself is actually not just a basic concept. It is a roadmap that you can see up there, filled with different stages in order to achieve Earth independence. There will be an awesome video about actually what that means later in the presentation. But just to give everybody an idea of what it entails, this from the Earth all the way to Mars will not happen until about the late 2030s, early 2040s. So it's a multi-stage mission that's going to occur over the next 20 years, and we are responsible for making informed decisions for our customer base today that will impact our ability to reach the various milestones over the next few years. So why does this actually matter in terms of our investment and using our scarce investment dollars correctly? Well, the second best investment that the federal government has ever made was the federal interstate system. I'm sure many of you have argued that this thing is horrible and frustrates you and you're stuck in traffic all the time. But in terms of promoting commerce, the GDP, and economic growth within the US, this is the second best investment that the federal government has ever made on a single program. The first best investment was the Apollo program. Statistics differ, but for every dollar that the US invested, everybody, and I mean the American taxpayers, the global economy, the American GDP, healthcare, information technology, communications benefited. For every dollar put in, the US federal government got anywhere from $13 to $40 on their return on investment. Nothing else in the history of the federal government has come close to this investment program. There will not be another Apollo program. This took 4% of the budget at its height. NASA currently has 0.4%. We will never see another space race spurred by political means and funded as well as the Apollo program. Does that mean we cannot provide value? We absolutely can, and we're doing it very well with lots of scarce resource dollars. To talk a little more about the impact, though, for you as a customer, just a few numbers. We won't go through much of it, but the two bottom ones on the left-hand side are significant. Since 2000, when this study was started, for technology spun out of NASA, not for the direct impact that NASA's done, but just for technology spun out, they've generated $5.2 billion, and they have saved the global economy $18.6 billion, which is the total revenue of the global airline industry in 2014. So these are significant. So what NASA does has direct impacts. They do spin-offs in areas such as consumer goods, energy and environment, information technology, and industrial productivity, just to name a few items. They touch almost absolutely everything. If you flew here today, you can thank NASA. The airspace transportation programs are making airline travel more efficient, faster, more reliable. This was taken last year in the Washington area and is trying to ensure that air travel is faster and uses less fuel by making slight adjustments to the rudder of a 757. The technologies developed in this program could theoretically be on airframes within the next few years. For all of us that live in California, we're all very familiar with this. The technologies touch everything. This is the overview of the giant California drought. So as you can see from 2002 to 2014, there's a significant difference. And it's not just that we're spending money to go and measure stuff like this. We can actually look at the tangible impacts on what it does to the local state economy and regional economy. This is a mission that was well funded under the Earth Science mission and has several follow-on ones. We expect to see more data coming out like this in the future. This is the northeastern storm that has stranded many people on the East Coast, taken sometime Friday afternoon, maybe Friday evening. NASA does weather. The reason that we know how well our climate works and our weather prediction and how accurate our weather prediction is due to the NASA Earth observing satellites that are in space right now looking down on stuff like this. We can use it to make air traffic transportation more efficient, faster, reroute. We can also use it to tell you to go buy supplies, beer, whatever you need. So we touch everything that you do, whether you are aware of it or not. We also do some pretty cool science stuff. This is the hyperspectral wall at the Ames Research Center, which is about an hour south of here at Ames Field down at Moffett. And this is the kind of science data that NASA prides itself on. We can visualize the Earth in a variety of different ways, a variety of different spectrums, and we can do some very cool stuff with it. I will say, this is not the kind of data that I'm here to talk about today. Sorry. This is the cool, the fun stuff. I'm here about the programmatic and the information technology data. So with that said,
for the first time since the Apollo moon landings, NASA is preparing to send astronauts beyond Earth orbit. And this time, the mission is the most ambitious we have ever undertaken. The journey to Mars. Carrying out this journey will require bringing together the best of our efforts, from robotic probes, to technology development, to astronauts in orbit, to robust new space vehicles. The journey is already underway, right here, right now. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station are learning more about living and working in space for long periods of time. Vital information for the challenging trip to Mars. Transportation to and from this station will be provided by our American commercial cargo and crew partners. Next, using the Orion crew vehicle and the powerful Space Launch System rocket, NASA will move into the proving ground of space, around and beyond the moon. Here, we will carry out increasingly ambitious missions to test out new systems and capabilities needed to reach Mars, like deep space habitats and advanced propulsion systems. Even as we speak, our robotic scouts are already exploring the Red Planet, preparing the way for astronauts to join them. Once we have matured our capabilities in the proving ground, we'll be ready for Earth independence, reaching our planetary neighbor, not just as temporary visitors, but as pioneers, expanding human presence into our solar system.
yeah, it's always fun when we get to show the cool videos, right? So let's take a little bit, a second or two, and actually talk about what makes up NASA, because this is important about how we actually provide value to the customers. So this is a quick overview of the major offices and mission directorates that make up the organization. Now, for those of you that are from NASA or familiar with it, there's a lot more that goes into this. This is the view from the strategic plan, but there's 8 significant offices and mission directorates that encompass everything from human exploration to the scientific missions to aeronautics to technology to information. Supporting those mission directorates and offices are 10 centers and 1 federally funded research laboratory, that one being JPL. NASA operates these on a domestic footprint all throughout the United States. They are headquartered in DC, and the operations are all coordinated through there. California happens to be significant in that there are 3 different centers located in it, both Ames, Armstrong, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Most people are familiar, if you look at the space agency, with Kennedy and Johnson, because that gets portrayed in all the movies, but there's a lot more that goes into these big pieces of the puzzles. These little icons are snapshots of what each center does, but to be fair, they all contribute to almost every single mission. So everyone knows NASA as the space shuttle. That's what people are familiar with. Sadly, when I went to work with them in 2014, a lot of people told me, hey, do you guys still exist? I thought you retired that thing. So this is the last launch in 2012. So the question is what is NASA doing forward to serve the American public and its customer and stakeholder base? Well, we're doing significant things. As you saw in the video, this is the Mars Curiosity rover. It's been on planet since I believe about 2012, still going incredibly strong and providing vital insight into organics and water presence on Mars. It will be joined somewhere around 2020 by another version of the rover dubbed the Mars 2020. By the way, if you haven't seen a mock-up of this in real life, it's the size of a Honda. It's not a small thing. We're also building the largest space telescope ever assembled. This is the successor to the Hubble. This is the James Webb Space Telescope. These are a portion of the primary mirror segment, and it will give us unprecedented access to research within deep space. We're also doing the Space Launch System. It provides a lot of jobs and infrastructure for American technologies, but it also will be the most significant and most powerful heavy lift rocket ever used since the Apollo program in the 1970s. Its first flight is targeted for sometime in 2018. This is the Orion capsule itself, and this is actually a shot of it being recovered off the coast of California after the EFT-1 flight in December of 2014. This capsule has gone farther into space than any man-rated capsule or device has gone since the 1970s. This is the image of Pluto. We're sending robotic pioneers and spacecraft out to the furthest edges of the solar system and imaging and returning results that we've never seen before. This was taken, I believe, earlier this year around March. So the question is, how do we get Matt Damon to Mars? I really don't care about getting Matt Damon back from Mars if he misses his ride, but I want to at least be able to get him there. That's somebody else's problem. So there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of coordination. So as we talk about the journey to Mars, everything that NASA is pretty much doing, whether it's in anywhere from aviation or chief technology, all the way up to exploration systems, empowers and impacts this journey to Mars. But that means you've got to make a lot of informed decisions, and you've got to make those in the correct manner, on a timely manner that may not actually get executed for 20 years. Oh, and by the way, the architecture around these Mars missions and the timelines are quite complex. This is the timeline for actually sending somebody to Mars, by the way. If you notice, the crew to Mars, the 24-day stay, is budgeted for about 2039. So there's a lot that goes into it. Each one of those triangles is a major launch by the Space Launch System. There's a lot of money that goes into this. This is the architecture expenditures through 2045, assuming nothing more than inflation, meaning if we don't get any increases in our budget, this is what we can do with inflation. And even then, we might be lucky because there could be budget cuts or an increased fiscally constrained environment. This is the actual architecture to get people, not even to Mars, to just the moon around Mars. So there's a lot of complex planning that goes in. The data behind these decisions is enormous. There are plenty of people within the agency that are trying to leverage big data, analytics, and cognitive computing, and to a certain extent, quantum computing, to solve these architecture and design issues. This is the architecture to actually get to Mars, by the way. So it's even more complex. It takes a variety of launches, pre-staging, and a lot of money, but also a lot of effort. So let's talk about the information technology piece, because that's what we're all here for, although I will get back to rockets and the more fun stuff later. We actually have, probably of any organization that I've ever been in, the most robust enterprise architecture, policies and procedures around it that I've ever seen in any organization that I've worked for. A lot of it's driven by this. This is the infrastructure management requirements for the National Aerospace and Technology, for NASA's Information Technology organization. And these are what govern how you operate enterprise architecture, how you operate project management, how you do your applications, and how everything has to be pieced together. It looks simple. It's a nice little grid, but it gets much more complex. It's guided by the Information Resources Management Strategic Plan. This is updated every few years and is based off of the NASA Strategic Plan, which was most recently issued in 2014. It has approximately 3 to 5 year goals and is monitored on a continuous basis and publicly reported at the end of the year in the annual performance report. So actually looking at enterprise architecture, this is the application portfolio managing sequence. This is what drives the development within the agency to actually create applications, to create solutions, and to create the infrastructure needed to manage the agency's data. And as you see, enterprise architecture strategy over there on the left is the first starting point, and it's a core component. Nothing goes through the agency in terms of development without either aligning to the enterprise architecture or a discussion around changing or transforming the enterprise architecture to ensure the needs of the future missions. We also have a very robust way of actually doing our IT portfolio. There's a huge discovery process where everything is thrown out. Things, they throw the darts at the wall, they see what sticks, and they determine what to invest and around where to invest. It goes through its development in the IT project portfolio and ultimately is assigned to the IT asset portfolio that then is distributed throughout the agency as they attempt to institutionalize either a solution, a technology, or an application. The green boxes that you see in the graphic are governed by the Chief Information Officer, which guides most of the strategy around enterprise architecture and information technology throughout the agency, although there are some other areas that are more specialized. NASA develops against a lot of technology. So this is a snapshot of the 2014 development overview, and these are applications by development technologies. They are literally willing to try everything. Absolutely everything, because they realize that they have to return good value to the customers and the stakeholders, but they also need to use every single available solution. So there are subject matter experts around almost everything. There's subject matter expertise around each and single area. And for those of you that represent Oracle and IBM and HP, we use all of you. So this is looking at core IT architecture and mission applications in architecture. So one of the core questions is, how do you align what is required by a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar mission to the core IT architecture? And this is a snapshot, by the way. This is taken from a specific center, the Marshall Space Flight Center, and does not represent the whole view of the agency. That graphic was just way too big. So how do you align all these into the specific buckets in order to make sure that you're providing the right information in a timely manner to make the correct decisions? Well, that's a bit of a challenge. We actually have a very robust integration architecture, but you have to want to be able to use it. You have to have the political will and the organizational will to use it. So as you can see, excluding the lines, it's a very well organized integration architecture. I can take pretty much any kind of information I want and aggregate it all the way from the mission directorate and or the center shown on the far left, all the way up to the agency level, which was where I was operating, shown in the green. The dashed lines are boundaries. These are organizational boundaries. These are not technical boundaries. NASA has a will to do stuff. The technical means are there as the way, but the organization has to be able to get out of a siloed operational mode and make sure that this integration can actually be executed. From a technological perspective, it works today. I can integrate anything I want. From an organizational perspective, I have to convince stakeholders to get their information out of their business silos and into this integration architecture to make sure that I go forward and through. Now, no matter what we do, no matter how good we are, and no matter how much money we throw at the problem, there's always going to be some boundaries. And you'll see these throughout several slides. They're generally indicated by a red dashed line or a red box. The external boundaries are how we report out. That could be to stakeholders such as yourself and the general public. That could be to other partner agencies such as NOAA and the FAA. That could be federal reporting requirements. Those boundaries are fine. They are manageable, and they're often governed by councils and agencies that are not doing NASA's core mission. They don't get updated that often. We can easily pivot to meet those needs. Side note, NASA is always recognized as the best agency in terms of being able to meet the federal reporting requirements through the use of their enterprise architecture and business intelligence systems. That's for the 24 CFO Act agencies, which is pretty much everything but defense and intelligence. We have integration. We have lots of integration. We integrate around SAP. We integrate around IBM Cognos. We pretty much use every solution, as I said earlier, that you can imagine. And I'm not going to explain this. I just wanted to show that we do have it. We have a very robust enterprise service bus that allows us to get information from our external partners, our internal partners, and aggregate it up. There's a lot of cool stuff that NASA's doing, trying to put information on your phone, on the members of the agency's phones, in the desktop, or in reports. And I'll talk about that a little later. We have a very robust workflow. This is a snapshot of 2 fiscal years. The shaded area was the area that I was providing subject matter expertise for, just in case anyone was wondering. And it's a constant pace. And by the way, this schedule, it becomes completely outdated the moment it's released. They are agile. They do use Scrum, if anyone's curious. But they are continuing to develop solutions utilizing the enterprise architecture that they have on a regular basis. Here's more of the schedule. And the reason I bring up the second part is because we actually do respond to the needs of the individual mission directorates. The blue, for example, is operations. And the pink that you see in the middle of the screen is the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate, which is the group responsible for putting the Space Launch System into orbit. We have a robust business intelligence architecture. This is where I spent my 18 months at NASA working specifically in this. I could integrate anything that I wanted around it. There was no data set that I ran across in any single organization that with minimal effort I couldn't get into this and then get something out. The problem is figuring out where those business silos actually existed and how I could pull data out of it. This was my dream. The enterprise architecture maturity model, as shown here on the screen, I really wanted to make sure that we could use it to the best and the brightest. We are definitely in the optimized core or the business modularity sector of our enterprise architecture maturity, but the information is out there in business silos. So how do you stop making the agency descriptive, and how do you get them to be predictive? And as you get to predictive analytics, you'll provide more strategic business value, you'll provide better informed decision making, and frankly, it'll just be an easier place to get data out for both the internal stakeholders and the external customers. So this is what I actually did for 2 years. And this is the performance management framework visualized in a variety of ways. Won't spend a lot of time on this because it's quite complex. But pretty much, from an agency perspective, it flows from the top down. You get the executive council, you get the program management council, the mission support council, and the senior management council. That is the governing structure for the agency. They set agency strategy, they set program management strategy, they set mission strategy, and their guidance flows down to every single other entity, stakeholder, mission, and operational piece of the agency. So this nice crazy round circle in the middle, that is the performance management cycle, and that assesses what NASA does with its approximately $18 billion a year budget. And this is why it's important for you, because the results of what come through that determine future agency strategy, and you as stakeholders are actually represented on both the far left and the far right. Anybody can have external input into the priorities and the mission planning for NASA. True, you might need to know who to call, but you can do it. You are a member of the taxpaying public or a beneficiary of space. You can absolutely get involved with this. Then it flows through the standard appropriations. Congress gives us money. Hopefully they give us what we've asked for. And then they formulate the missions from there. It flows through the performance management cycle. We assess how it does. We plan for future years. And then we get the major outcomes. And so a few of them are listed here. The Webb telescope, the air traffic control upgrade, the low density supersonic accelerator, which is improving parachutes all throughout the world, the space launch system, the International Space Station, STEM engagement. And these external outputs come out in the form of missions, reports, technologies, and then spin-offs, research, and public goods. This is how you benefit. When we execute, everything we do becomes public. None of that we retain. Every single thing we do goes into the general public and into the catalog of technologies available to license and research. So you want your input to flow through this cycle so that you can benefit from the outputs. So let's talk about boundaries. There are a lot of them. So there's boundaries that NASA imposes from an organizational perspective. Obviously, the management councils sit above. There's a boundary in getting information out of them just due to when they meet, how they operate, and what they're willing to address. There's the boundary for the performance management cycle. This is a small team. There was probably maybe 20 of us in the entire division that touched any part of this process. Then you flow down to the mission directorates and the operations and execution area, and those are the ones actually doing the work. They're trying to pull that information up. So how do we make sure that we're not creating artificial boundaries for us? Oh, and then by the way, there's external ones. So it's hard to get input and information into the agency. Sometimes that stops with Congress in the appropriation cycle, and it's often challenging to get information back out to the general public because not everyone knows what NASA's doing across their broad portfolio. And then even within the performance management cycle, walls have been built. So the real challenge is, how do you bring down all of that? Well, first you have to look at what performance management actually does. And this is a quick view. So on the right, you can see a cycle year view. And this illustrates everything that we do in any given year. So it's performance planning, performance reporting, quarterly reporting, and program execution. And why this is important is because the whole thing overlaps drastically. So we are operating in one year, reporting on the prior year, planning for the future year, and thinking about the strategic plan the year after that. And we have to do it. We are required by law to report out on this cycle. And a lot of it becomes in the form of reports and interactions with the general public. So some of the reports that you can see are listed in the little thumbnails: the agency financial report, the annual performance report, the annual performance plan, and the congressional justification, otherwise known as the budget. And then on the left, you can see pretty much just the depth of what goes on at any given time. And it fades out to represent what influences are coming from both past and present years. So a quick overview of the kind of stuff that NASA actually puts out, why it benefits you. This is the annual performance plan and the annual performance report. For those of you at IBM, you should be very happy to know this whole thing is built in Cognos. It's all automated, it all reports, we track everything, and we can generate this thing pretty much any given time, assuming that the data is there and available. The next version of this will be issued in about a week, I believe. So here's the challenge. How do we get the information out of that architecture on the left, that's the mission architecture, the program architecture, and then the execution data? How do we get it into something like we have on the right? It's not a technical challenge. We have enough of the integration capabilities. We have the will, we have the way, but there's not really a guiding principle or the means. How do we make this have less boundaries? We want to get it to this. We never can remove all the boundaries that our organization has. But if we can get it to this, we can be a lot more efficient, we can make faster decisions, and maybe we can get to Mars in the 2030s. We want to advance up the enterprise maturity model. We want to get to predictive analytics. We want to be looking forward. We want to know that if a program is going to breach or we're going to run into problems, that we know it now so that we can take the corrective actions. We don't want to have to do it after the fact. So there is an answer. Starting in 2014, there's a new agency operating model being proposed. And it's a deep dive. Not everyone's happy with it, but I think it's the right thing to do, and so does the agency. It's being championed by Robert Lightfoot. He is the chief operating officer of the agency and the highest civil servant within NASA. His new agency operating model is built around the puzzle pieces that you see there on the screen. It looks at program and project planning. It looks at the business services assessment. It looks at the technical capability assessment. And the idea behind all of this is to create a decision-enabled entity so that we can make these correct decisions and we can do it fast. We have to be out of this business silo model, and we have to really advance our organizational decision-making capabilities in the near future to meet our goals in the mission. So when I talk about the near future versus the long haul, our future mission needs, we plan 30 years out. Our near-term mission needs, we plan 1 to 10. But we have to make or buy decisions now. So how do we best align the workforce? How do we buy our technologies, our commercial off-the-shelf solutions? What do we do? That's what the technical capabilities assessment is looking at, and that's what the business services capabilities assessment is also looking at. We need to figure out how best to enable this new operating model cost effectively, but also to serve the stakeholders at the highest and best. So where are we right now? These are the roadmaps and the next steps. So 4 boxes is outlined by Lightfoot. You get the data input, you get analysis, you get decisions, and you get institutionalized. Right now, we're in the decision model. This is what all the assessments are looking at. And eventually, once we get our results and we actually run it through the councils and we create the right governance structure, we will institutionalize those changes. And as NASA institutionalizes the changes, we can make them stick. We have the will, we have the way, and we have the means if we can figure out what exactly we need to do. So we're here. Thankfully, we're towards the right, but there's still a lot of effort left to do. So let's just take a quick minute or two and look at one of the assessments, because this is how it actually impacts the operating model. So looking at the business services assessment. Here's a shocker, they did IT first. So they looked at the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and that was their pilot program for the business services assessment. They went through a phasing approach where they did a preliminary phase, an assessment phase, a recommendation phase, and then they'll issue what's called decision papers. And those are recommendations to the senior leadership and strategic councils about what should change in NASA and how that might change funding. So this was the pilot program that leads into a much more robust work plan that looks at procurement, human capital, budget management, and facilities. My group was in the budget management, by the way, so they're probably going through that right about now. Why this is important. Each one of those deep dives within the BSA areas has its own architecture. It's all integrated. There is no great, easy to read, on a presentation version of this diagram that shows the entire architecture integration throughout the agency. But each single area that has having the BSA dive has a robust architecture that can be utilized. They're not looking at the architecture. They know the architecture is right. It's all the processes, the procedures, and the management behind it, and how can you better utilize that? How do you get it so that everything is into something like this? This is what you want. This is robust enough. Yeah, we need to make some changes, but we want to be able to use this for every single data set that's in there, and we want to be able to get that across the agency, and we want to be able to do it quickly in a self-service model. And the answer to that is the operating model. It is really a cultural change at NASA. We have to get better. We have a mission, we have a mandate, and we have to meet it. And there's no more Apollo moment that we are going to get. So we're going to use this, we're going to leverage this, and we're going to transform it. We want to go back up this. I love this slide, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. But we want to get to the far right of this. We want to get into the business modularity. We would love it if we could answer the question, how can we make it happen? How can we make it not happen? Cognitive computing could be the answer to that one. If not, at least better analytics. We're never going to figure out if something is going to successfully launch or the scientific data is going to work through cognitive analytics. But we might know if this is feasible from a budget-constrained environment. We might know how this is going to play out for our stakeholders. We might realize that this is not a good trade-off of investment dollars because it's not going to benefit enough people. So back to this. We want to get this. We want to remove these boundaries. This is our ideal state, and the operating model goes towards this. It is trying to remove those boundaries, and is so far is moving along. One of the ways that you actually remove those boundaries is by giving information back to your customers. So this is an example. It's all open source data, I might add, about the 2014 strategic plan framework. This is a dashboard that is currently being developed within the agency. I believe it is on SAP, but it could be on Cognos. I'm not quite sure what they're doing right now. And this is getting information into the hands of the decision makers. Nothing like this is done at NASA. And by the way, it didn't take any reorganization of the enterprise architecture to be able to actually execute this. It took getting information out of those business silos to be able to put something like this together. That was the challenge. It was dragging that information out. It was integrating it. We have this little thing called the strategic plan. It gives a strategic framework. Everything that the agency does is based around that. Yes, they do change it every 4 years, but it's the guiding principles. Everything is aligned to that strategic plan, whether you want it to be or not within your small organization within the agency. So getting it out of the business silos into something like this allows people to make more informed decisions. It allows information to flow more freely. And by the way, our entire infrastructure is geared so that it's about a 2 or 3 day process just for the security check to get people access to this. Everybody in the agency can have access to this today after that check. There's nothing that is stopping anybody from seeing this data or this information. It's not classified, it's not sensitive but unclassified, it's not even confidential. It's confidential to the agency before it's released publicly, but there are no barriers to seeing this other than organizational and political barriers. Some examples of things that we want to do looking forward. NASA does everything around their baseline performance reporting schedule. We want to be able to take this information, which by the way, this is a sample, it's all done by hand. We can automate this. I could automate this today. So the question is, why aren't we, and how can we get it forward? Again, it goes back to the operational and the organizational change. This stuff should be in the hands of the decision makers on a, let's say, a daily basis. Chances are it probably doesn't get updated that much. Maybe it's a weekly basis, maybe it's a monthly basis, but we can make very informed decisions with this information when it flows freely throughout the agency. It takes 8 hours and 400 slides to brief the agency on this information. It is the longest day meeting that the agency holds on a monthly basis. They do deep dives. This is the Science Mission Directorate example that actually shows slight forward-looking, warnings around cost, technical, and programmatic challenges, and just another example of what gets reported at the NASA baseline performance reporting meetings. But really, we want to get to this. We don't want to have to be challenged to make management decisions that might delay this launch. Publicly, it's been delayed quite a few times. The first launch of this without a manned crew will launch in 2018. There is significant debate about when the actual manned version will launch. The last statement that I heard publicly was sometime in 2021. It could be as late as 2023. We want to get to this. We have the will. We'll eventually have the technical capability. We just need to find the way. And we need to make those informed decisions now because we're not landing until the 2040s. I want to get Matt Damon to Mars. We all want to get Matt Damon to Mars. So let's actually make this happen. And frankly, my call to action for everybody here is the utilization of space benefits absolutely every single one of you. It touches everything you do. It touches everything your companies do. And really, we all benefit from the increased access to space. It doesn't have to be NASA. It could be commercial space, although NASA is going to be still the pioneer in major exploration development missions, such as going to Mars. We want to get there. We have a way. We need to make informed decisions now, and that has to pull down barriers. And frankly, we'd like every one of your help. All of you, whether it's HP, IBM, Oracle, anybody, we need your help in getting Matt Damon to Mars. So on that note, thank you very much. And I'm going to give a slight pitch for what I do on the side, just in case anyone wants to see this. I am trying to commercialize more space technology. One of the biggest challenges that we run into is that nobody knows how to approach anybody that's in this room. They have a great space technology. It's a CubeSat. It does something awesome. It's great. They're fantastic engineers. They do not understand enterprise architecture. They don't understand analytics. They don't understand sometimes business planning. And as the Space Frontiers Foundation's Director of Venture Strategy and Research, I'm trying to bring those people together. I have investors that say there are not enough investment viable opportunities in the aerospace sector right now. And the answer to that is they don't have a good business plan, and they really don't because they're ignoring the core competencies of every single person in this room. So if anybody's actually interested in chatting, I can chat more about that, but that's what we do on the side.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. Please take a seat. Again, asking the questions will be James DeRave, and kick off with the first one.
Okay, so we've actually got three on the same topic, or very closely related. So I'll read one of them. You looked at IT as your first assessment. Won't your assessment be obsolete given your target need date and the rapid change of technology? How are you planning for that rapid change? And the other related questions, we expanded that beyond IT into all the other technologies which are going to change out of all recognition in the time before you get to Mars. Absolutely. I mean, planned obsolescence is a big component of anything that NASA does. And it doesn't necessarily mean that planned obsolescence is a bad thing either. The good news about information technology at NASA, it is incredibly agile. They use Scrum, they innovate, and they do agile practices for almost everything they do. That's enterprise architecture, that's applications development, that is just even the program management side of things is all in the agile state. Yes, we are absolutely fine if the results of the BSA assessment for IT is outdated. It only needs to be as valid in the near term to support the operating model transformation. This will be an ongoing process. The operating model transformation is the right one. We want a decision-enabled entity, but we know that that changes, and that is going to differ over the next 10 to 20 years. So we're okay with that. We have plans in place, but we need to look at what is working within the IT side of things and what is not working and make adjustments accordingly. Okay, thank you. A slightly more detailed one. How do you scale Agile development so that it works with the enterprise architecture? Do you use scaled Agile framework or something similar? I believe they use the scaled Agile framework across the entire agency. Don't quote me on that one. We definitely used it in the operations area that I worked on, and that seemed to be a core tenet of the agency. They do, like I said, they use Agile for absolutely everything. The scaled Agile framework definitely matches the design documents and all the artifacts that I had seen during my time at the agency there. Although I will say this, I've never actually heard the SAFE term used, but all the artifacts and reference documents looked exactly like the SAFE framework. Thank you. So I've got some very specific information questions. What's the budget? How many people in NASA? How many IT staff? And how many are enterprise architect certified in some way or other?
So thankfully, I'm able to report that the budget is about $19.1 billion right now. They gave us an extra billion. Super pumped. We can do a lot with that, and some of the programs were fully funded. NASA itself is made up of contractors and civil servants. The number off the top of my head, I actually don't remember the total number for everybody that's involved. I believe it's in the about $150,000 or 150,000 employee range when you factor in contractors. Each center has its own IT staff. I do not know the numbers of that, but the bigger the center, the larger the IT staff is going to be. The OCIO office itself is probably about 50 people or so. That's based at headquarters in DC. In terms of the actual number of enterprise architects that work within the NASA Enterprise Applications Competency Center, I believe I ran into anywhere from about 15 to 20 that were purely doing enterprise architecture strategy and design. It was a multifunctional matrix organization, so there was a lot of overlap in terms of what people actually did. But our team itself had access to, I think, 3 at any given time.
And I suppose you have no idea how many are TOGAF certified in the organization.
I have no idea.
And if
I know we are a member of the Open Group.
and if we'd done our homework, we would have been able to tell you, but there we go. What are the 3 key business problems that the NASA EA has to solve?
Well, first off, budget. Our budget will always be constrained. We will never get a higher budget. So the actual OCIO budget is a small percentage of the large annual NASA budget. When you think that the ISS costs anywhere around $3 billion a year to operate, OCIO is never going to get those kind of numbers. So it definitely has to operate in a constrained environment. And that is it's a big risk and a big challenge. And it's also predicting what the agency is going to do next. We know we're going to launch a space launch system in a few years, but we definitely don't know how things might evolve around that. Are we going to speed up production of it? Are we going to need to make it more informed decisions? Is Congress going to come in and say, we need more information, and this has to be validated, something similar to like a Sarbanes-Oxley approach, where we now have to track and disseminate this information. So there's a lot of unknowns. They are very good at predicting the unknowns and migrating their enterprise architecture and their strategy around it accordingly. The other challenge is trying to make sure that you're satisfying the entire user group, because aeronautics has different needs than, say, science.
Okay, thank you. How do you mitigate data security policy, confidentiality, et cetera, and boundaryless information flow?
So the good news is most of the information that NASA utilizes, especially in some of the bigger processes and procedures that I described, it's all housed in NASA data centers. We are required to be FISMA certified, so we have strong information security standards. There are strong personal identification standards as well. We use smart cards. I had a specific badge that could only get me into certain buildings, even though I was actually in the office of the chief financial officer and we wrote all the checks. I actually couldn't get into other centers and other places without prior permission. So there is a robust environment around that. That said, the federal government, as most of you probably know, has a lot of challenges around information security. NASA does sit on one of the working panels that comprises the other 24 CFO Act agencies, as well as the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. There's a lot of information sharing that goes along with that, and they are reorganizing and reinvigorating their cybersecurity initiatives. They just actually brought on a senior advisor, I believe, in the last few weeks.
Thank you. There's one here that you might understand, but I certainly don't. It's bigger than a 1,000-second burn. Does that make any sense to you?
I mean, I don't know the actual rate of burn for. I don't know if you're talking about the rocket or if you're talking a financial burn.
Yeah. Who asked the question?
We talked about.
It'll be done.
Are we going to get above 1,000-second burn?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I believe in the heavy lift version, which will debut sometime in the 2020s, you theoretically should, but it may depend on mission profile and whatever it's carrying.
So
It is our dream.
So speaking someone completely ignorant, and I'm sure there are others in the audience, is this because everything melts after 1,000 seconds?
Sometimes you just run out of space to hold fuel.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so that's a big challenge.
So something, okay, I kind of get it. Do you have any comments on Mr. Musk and integration to SpaceX from NASA?
So SpaceX is a partner. We want to be enabling the commercial new space sector. It is vital that NASA, for both its own priorities and its own missions and the American public and the American economy, that we foster development within the new space sector. I'll tell you this, the second that SpaceX landed that rocket back at the Cape, I believe it was the middle of December, probably 1,000 new space business plans got validated the second that rocket touched down. It's an enabler, it's a game changer. Reusable rocketry in space will change the game for everybody involved. The cost of launch becomes much cheaper, access to space is much better. We want them to succeed. We absolutely do want them to succeed, and we have been partnering with them for multiple years to deliver cargo and ultimately crew to the International Space Station. They are not a competitor. If they reach Mars first, by the way, we are perfectly happy with that. We're still going.
And finally, a slightly more small p political one. So I understand that astronauts going to Mars is cool, but why? What can going to Mars actually accomplish beyond just going into space around the Earth? We can send rovers there. What's the advantage of sending Matt Damon?
I mean, hopefully you don't have to rescue Matt Damon, and he gets a little better by the time we actually send him. But the advantage to sending humans there is that they can do a lot that the rover can't. They can make decisions in real time. That rover, by the way, is very, very impressive. It's also very, very slow. I don't even think it will cross this stage in a single day of operations. And they do that on purpose because they are trying to make sure that, one, they don't damage it or do anything else. Having humans there, as we've proved in the Apollo program on the moon, make it a lot easier to make real-time decisions and adjust accordingly. The other benefit to that, to everybody, is health. One of the biggest advantages of the Apollo program were innovations in healthcare technologies. We actually have a lot to solve before we can get people that deep into space, and everybody's going to benefit from it because NASA will make that technology public and available to be commercialized. So we want people to go into space. And frankly, if we're sending more people into space, we're developing more technology, it's impacting the American economy.
Okay, thank you. That's a lot.
Thank you. Just one question I have to ask. You talked quite a bit about how robust the architecture is, and there's a will to do things, and looking for the way maybe. But one of the things that's required is cultural change, which is consistent with just about every organization that's going through some kind of transformation. What kind of steps are you taking to address the cultural aspect, the human aspect? The culture of the organization is so often influenced by the humans. What kind of steps are you taking for that?
Sure. So they are doing a lot of stuff towards the cultural change. Part of it is trying to bring more key work back in-house from the contractor staff, and that has nothing to do against the contractors. But when you have those capabilities in-house, you can reorganize and you can best prioritize some of your resources. So there will always be countless contractors at NASA no matter what, but they're trying to right-size that. The other thing is they're trying to attract a younger workforce. NASA always gets named, at least for the last few years, as the best place to work in the federal government, and they are really trying to bring in more innovators. They're trying to lower the barriers to entry, and they're trying to get people that are younger in their career that want to sort of break the status quo, and then empowering them. That's the other big thing. And you can empower them through leadership. You can empower them through training. You can empower them by ensuring that they're in an environment where they have a foundation for execution. I came in not knowing anything about NASA's enterprise architecture, other than that I was just going to come in and help out with it and bring some subject matter expertise. And I really worked with all of them to say, look, we can change the game. The foundation is here. There's nothing that we need to do from a cost perspective. We just have to have the will, and then it's going and getting the political buy-in. And they want people like me in there and doing that. And they are hiring people exactly like me to do it. So I think we are seeing the cultural shift. It's getting to where it needs to be, but it's a long road.
Okay. Once again, Jeff, thanks very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.